Recording in progress.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll get started. We know it was short notice and we weren't sure how many people would be able to join us. But as you just heard, we're going to record it. And the good news is that the New York State site for this grant is pretty well done. So this is called the New York State Seed Funding Grant. And I think it's because New York State got a lot of money to help businesses during COVID. Got a bunch of echoes there. Do we know? Can we help with that? So, okay. And if any of you tried to apply for the earlier New York State COVID funding, you'll know that it had a ton of rules and was very restrictive. This round is easier and it is focused on startups. So let's get started. I will share my screen. So we've tailored this presentation to our startups. So there's more information on the website than what you see here. But this is meant to be an introduction. So that's the key thing. So the fund is to provide assistance to early stage small businesses negatively impacted by COVID-19 health and safety protocols. That sounds like if you didn't have issues with COVID or you didn't have to buy masks and all that, you wouldn't be eligible. However, basically, it's any expenses that you incurred during the period of COVID. And I shouldn't say any, there's a list. But if you incurred the expenses during the period of the height of the pandemic, they qualify. The grant amounts are based on your gross revenues. It's a strange thing. The grant amounts are based on your gross revenues, but you have to show that you have expenses. So it's kind of a split personality. But here's the amounts. Up to 50,000, you'll get 5,000. Up to 100,000, you'll get 10,000. And that if you haven't filed the federal tax return so far, then they'll give you 5,000. So to be eligible, you have to be qualified to do business in New York State. So, you know, and you have to show that you do business in New York State when you file the application. So that could be something like a sales tax return or a DBA, something like that. You have to have started business on or after September 1st, 2018. Some of our startups, they started a little too soon, so they didn't qualify. And have been operational for at least 6 months before the application is submitted. You have to have over 5,000 gross receipts. Or if you just started and you haven't filed a return, then you have to have $5,000 in expenses. You have to be up to date on your taxes, and you didn't qualify under the New York State COVID-19 Small Business Recovery Grant Program. And that's the one that I mentioned earlier that was more complex. And they had income requirements and all these things at the beginning of that application. So, eligible costs incurred between September 1st, 2018 and January 1st, 2022. So I did a test run on the application myself because as a consultant, I'm now self-employed. And my business started after September 1st, 2018, but I didn't have any costs before January 1st of 2022 because I was still an employee. So that kicked me out as being ineligible. When you go into the application, they'll actually ask you for the primary use of the grant. And so you have to show that you had some of these expenses during that time period, but choose the one that you know you had. And insurance and utilities are going to be a key cost, any supplies or materials. Payroll costs, we have a question out on that as to whether personal draws for self-employed people qualify as payroll. So I can't tell you that right now. But you know, what you're looking at here is really overhead costs to keep your business going during that time frame. So when you get to that drop-down menu, just enter the one that you think is your highest cost, and then you'll be able to go on later and fill in the actual amounts.
Nancy, can I ask a quick question, if you
Sure.
don't mind? In the payroll cost, would that cost include, like, say, if I were to use a subcontractor through my business, or?
Yes. So you could include them. They're not considered payroll, but they would be other costs.
Okay.
So, the key thing is when you get to, there's a yes or no question that says, have you incurred 5,000 in COVID-19 related expenses between 9/1/2018 and 1/1/22? And if you say no to that, you get kicked out. Basically, you're told you're ineligible. So you've got to answer yes to that to get in, and then say, okay, what was the rest of it? Ineligible uses of the funds, you can't use it to prepay any loans that you got through the federal government, might be an EIDL loan or any other New York State COVID loans. One of the things that's odd is this is a grant, but it's actually a reimbursement for your expenses that you incurred between September 1, 2018 and 1/1/22. So it's not like you're talking about money you're going to use in the future. It's what have you used in the past. They want lots of documentation for this to show that you've been in business. So they'll want a copy of your tax return or your Schedule C, proof of your business organization, business location in New York State, who owns the business, 3 months of bank statements for the business bank account. That's actually really important. Hopefully you've got a business bank account and you're not intermingling it with your personal. So provide evidence that the business is operational. That's basically your tax returns. But if you haven't filed, then you'll need to show expense documentation and invoice documentation. The one grant per business is pretty expected. And it's key that the application get in as quickly as possible because they expect a high volume of requests, but they haven't done a very good job of promoting it. So if you get your application in now, you probably have a pretty good chance of getting approved. So New York State contracted with an organization called Lendistry, who is the one that does the applications. And I've never done much with them. I know they've been doing all the New York State COVID programs, but we've talked to some of our colleagues in the business banking world, and they said that Lendistry actually does a pretty good job. So they were positive. Here's something to remember. If you get this grant money, you have to pay income tax on it, both federal and state. So that takes a big chunk of the money. And it almost makes you wonder if it's worth filing for it, but you'll have to decide that yourself. It's different than the Paycheck Protection money, which Congress made non-taxable. So, so how are applicants approved or declined for grant funding? When you go through the application, you'll see there's several places where you have to meet a requirement, or else they'll tell you that you can't continue. So that's good. But even if you can make it all the way through the process, they're not making any promises because they're saying, A, the money might run out, or B, if we're going to make sure that the money gets to the state across the state. So that I think they're worried that New York City might get all the applications in and take all the money before anybody upstate gets it. And then if you make a mistake in your application, then you need to say, hey, you know, I clicked the wrong box. They have a call center with a phone number. So hopefully they will be helpful. The website, like I said, is pretty good. You start with the apply. And this is a great application because you can save and continue. You don't have to do it all at once like so many other applications. The SBA, a couple of their applications, I think for the EIDL loan, you had to do it all at once and you couldn't save and continue, if I remember correctly. And the website has lots of good information. So it's actually very helpful, frequently asked questions. So contacts for more information. There's Mari's information, Barry, mine. I'm going to be off next week completely. So you want to focus on your questions on with Mari and Barry. And we will help and see what we can find out. So that's really it. It's pretty simple, but more than anything, it's wanting us, you know, we wanted to get the information out so that people could see if they can take advantage of it. So our original plan was for this to take half an hour. We booked the Zoom for an hour, but so here we are halfway, you know, in 15 minutes in. So time for questions.
Nancy,
So
go ahead.
Sorry, thanks. So I didn't have a physical space or employees, so I was missing a lot of those expense categories. I did buy a fairly large piece of machinery last year, so I saw that equipment on the list. Obviously, my accountant had me amortize that or depreciate it over a couple of years. So do you know whether it would be like the depreciation that I took on it or the actual cash that I paid for it?
I don't know because I haven't gotten that far into the application myself. We could take a look. Mari was reading the frequently asked questions. I don't know. Did you see anything on that, Mari, when you got into that level of detail?
I do not remember seeing it, but we would gladly look into it and see if we can find the answer for you.
Yeah, we'll check that out. And if you're working from home, remember that your property taxes at home, that's on the list.
So again, it wouldn't be just like whatever, you know, little piddly amount they give me on square footage of my home office. It would be actually like a portion of the.
No, it would be your
taxes.
percentage. Yeah. For the
Okay.
home office. Yeah. Were you able to take a draw from the business?
Yeah, I have. It's not my primary income by a long shot, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the questions that we haven't been able to get an answer to yet is if draw qualifies as payroll, because draw did qualify as payroll under the PPP. So we need to find that out.
And just so to let you know, Nancy, I do have a call to them and I was put on a list. So I'm expecting a call back from them anytime. So hopefully they'll have an answer to that.
Okay, great. You could ask them about the machinery question too and see what they have to say there.
Absolutely. I did make a note about that as well.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions?
So I was one of the ones that clicked the button no instead of yes, and ended up calling them back. You do have to do an immense amount of paperwork, if for, you know, from my side. But they were very helpful. They made it active again. So I'm just waiting to hear back. So just letting you guys know, it's not hard. You know, you just have to explain yourself. And
Okay, good. Good. That's good to know. Thanks, Brent.
Mhm.
I was going to say too, something that I didn't see on there, but loss during COVID, like if you guys had to run like a sale to reduce inventory, I would think that that loss, if you had to do sales or something like that to reduce your inventory, is something that you could capture on this as well.
Well, you know, they would take that as one of the things that has not been included in any of the PPP money or any of the relief is inventory. So that would be an inventory related one. So I don't think that would qualify. But another question. Yeah, because if we go back, let me look at the way they describe the eligible costs. Other documented COVID-19 costs is approved by ESD. So that, you know, that could be who knows what that is. Yeah, and the way they describe the machinery is other machinery or equipment costs. So
So sorry.
Go ahead.
So, I mean, by insurance costs, is that any insurance, like my livery insurance would be included in that, or does it have to have something to
Yes.
do with COVID or, okay,
Yeah, it's any insurance. So
okay. Cool.
yeah, and that's the confusing thing because you would think it would have something to have to do with COVID, but the key is that you incurred the cost during that time period that they give, which they look upon as the COVID, you know, expenses during that period. It's almost like a default that they're COVID related expenses. You know, and if you look at the ineligible uses of funds, it's really the only thing they talk about is you can't use it to pay back other debt, but they don't really talk about ineligible expenses, which is rather unhelpful. So. And when you look at the frequently asked questions, the information there is just exactly the same. You know, it doesn't hurt. This is one of those cases where it doesn't hurt. Hi, Barbara. It doesn't hurt to go on and just start the application as long as you make sure you don't shut yourself out at a couple of critical places.
I know
They do want.
Go ahead.
They do want, you actually have to take a picture of your driver's license and do a selfie to verify your identity. But they set it up so that's not too hard to do that.
I got an extension on filing my taxes, and so I'm still working on that from last year. I know you said that the time frame is as soon as possible. Obviously, that has to be in by the 15th. So, is like how soon is as soon as possible here?
I think having your tax returns going to be more valuable than getting it in sooner. But you know, if you do all of the application, have everything done, so once you've got your tax return, you can just upload it. That would be a good way to approach it.
Sorry,
Hi, Barbara.
I know, I'm sorry I was late. Yesterday I set my alarm so that I knew that and then it was today. So I'll go back and watch.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're almost wrapping up, I guess.
Yeah, because it really is pretty, the introductory information is pretty short, but you know, let me do a recap just for everybody in the call. If you started your business on or after September 1st, 2018, and you're still in business now, and you have at least $5,000 in revenues from September 1st, 2018 through January 1st, 2022, then you're probably eligible for at least a $5,000 grant. It may be up to $10,000. So, and the confusing thing that's created the most question is, the deciding question is, have you incurred $5,000 in COVID-19 related expenses during that period? But COVID-19 related expenses has a broad business expense definition. So that's the biggest confusion right there. Barbara, had you had a chance to look at the website at all? Okay, all right. Well, when you do, feel
Yeah.
free to contact us.
Yep.
Okay. So any other questions? I think if you sit down and start the application and you say, hey, I'm not sure about this, and you just want somebody to kick the idea around with, then feel free to call Mari or Barry. So now I've got Mary. It's a combination of Barry and Mari.
It's contagious, I'm telling you.
Yeah, it is contagious. So anyway, we'll be here to help. More than anything today was to make you aware of the opportunity for you to take a look at the website, take a look at the expenses and see if this would work for you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
We'll see you
Thank
later.
You're
you.
welcome. Any other questions?